Sunday, this past Sunday, I talked about the different kinds of crowds, the one on Palm Sunday, and then the different crowd yet again on Good Friday. In between Palm Sunday and Good Friday, we have tonight, Maundy Thursday. Maundy Thursday and Good Friday give us two very different insights into the ideas of sin and redemption and liberation. You may have been taught a version of Good Friday that I was taught as a child. It went something like this. We are a sinful people, and because Jesus knew that I was going to be mean to my sister 2,000 years later, Jesus had to come and die on a cross so that God wouldn't send me to hell. And yes, I was taught that version of Good Friday in a 5th grade Sunday school class at Our Redeemer Lutheran Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Many adults, though, have a similar belief. Modern Christianity tends to focus on personal salvation and personal sin, and to see the cross as the source of that salvation, our release from sin. In one of my seminary classes, I heard a fellow student say that without Judas and his betrayal, we wouldn't have had salvation, because we wouldn't have the resurrection. Judas had to do what he did so that we could have redemption. I would counter that Jesus was on a collision course with the Roman Empire and that he would have been killed regardless. He was crucified, a capital punishment reserved for those who were a threat to the state. He was on Rome's radar. If we see Jesus as following in the steps of the ancient prophets, we get a much richer view. Much as we might want to believe that we can read the Bible as a prophecy for our current age, biblical prophets weren't in the business of forecasting the future, and certainly not thousands of years into the future. They came to remind the people of the ways that they had fallen away from God. They came to the people to tell them that God was disappointed. But much more important, they came to the people to help them remember that God has a much more expansive vision for the people, a vision where everyone is included and everyone has a chance for flourishing. The prophets came to help the people reclaim that vision. Jesus does not spend much time talking about individual sin, the way that 21st century people might expect. There's not much pro-family language in the speeches of Jesus. Jesus doesn't really talk much about sexuality of any type. The disagreements about moral questions that consume us in the 21st century, those disagreements that rip churches apart, those aren't evident in much of what Jesus says. But the dangers of empire that Jesus criticizes, those dangers are not very different today in the 21st century. Jesus was calling out the sin of colluding with empire, and many of those sins would be familiar to us today. The people in power taking advantage of those who have fewer resources. And often the people in question had fewer resources because of the way that the Roman Empire had set up life, and all the empires before it, and all the empires after it. So widows found themselves not only having to grieve the loss of a spouse, but they also faced the loss of income. Refugees found themselves without safety, often because of decisions made by a distant empire. Orphans faced a much bleaker future in Roman times slavery than children with parents. All of the people faced increasing taxes to fund the projects of the Roman Empire, and many of the people would lose everything they owned when they couldn't pay. Then, as now, people were desperate for change. The events of Holy Week take place against a backdrop of Passover, the holiest of days of the Jewish calendar. Jesus has spent much of his ministry reminding people that they serve a God who brought them out of bondage in Egypt. The festival of Passover celebrates that deliverance. Jesus offers people similar deliverance, but it may not be in the form they were expecting. Many people in the time of Jesus yearned for a homeland free of Roman occupiers. Jesus showed them a way, but it wasn't a military way. Jesus showed them what could reweave the ripped and torn social fabric. Jesus showed them the way of love. And what does that look like? Jesus spent much of his ministry feeding people. Often, after a miracle healing, there's a feeding. It might be another miracle, like the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, or it might be a regular meal. I'm thinking of Simon Peter's mother-in-law, who is healed on her deathbed. What does she do? She gets up and serves a meal. In my younger days, I would have seen that as a terrible thing. People taking advantage of this poor sick woman who the minute she's healed, she has to get up and cook dinner. But it may be that she understood the mission of Jesus much earlier than most people. We feed people to heal them. We gather here tonight to celebrate Maundy Thursday, which some call the Last Supper, but it wasn't the Last Supper. If we look at the post-resurrection stories of Jesus, he's still there, sharing meals, providing sustenance. My favorite is the last chapter, the last verses of John, where Jesus is cooking fish on the beach. Fish on the beach, and this is in addition to the catch of fish that the disciples get so much that it almost swamps their boat. Abundance and food. If that's what Jesus was all about. In addition to his preaching and teaching and feeding, Jesus spent his ministry doing the tasks that were often relegated to the lower rungs of society. Tonight we see him washing feet. This would not have been a task that regular people did. Even people in the lower levels of society probably had someone else who would help with the foot washing. Jesus does the foot washing. This would have been unusual, so Simon Peter's reaction would not be that unfounded. Jesus spent his ministry looking for ways to include those who were on the margins, and he had plenty of people to invite to join him. In the time of strong empires, many people find themselves in precarious positions, and along comes Jesus, offering food, offering more than food, offering community. Then as now, people wondered if they had found the true Messiah. Then as now, they doubted whether the way of Jesus would be enough to defeat the forces of empire. Good Friday can make us doubt everything we've been taught as we watch that distant empire show how deadly it can be to show up armed with nothing but love. Easter, though, Easter shows us how empty that deadly force is. And it's Maundy Thursday that shows us how we are to love, how we are to defeat the forces of empire, by service, by sharing a meal together, by creating community where community did not exist before. Through these actions, rooted in love and care, we defeat the powers of death, and we show up, ready for Easter, ready for resurrection, ready to hear again the promise that Jesus gives us, the promise that God gives us, that death does not have the final answer. Amen.